Welcome to Buried Secrets, a podcast about the paranormal, the occult, and weird and forgotten history. I'm Chris. You know, I've been told that if I was in a horror movie, I would be the one to die first. I think because I have a sense of curiosity that sometimes ignores common sense. And I feel like today's episode is a good example of that, perhaps. For the last couple episodes, I've been talking about two different state parks in Raleigh and Durham, North Carolina, that I really enjoy hiking to, and that I have done a little bit of paranormal investigation in. And one of those parks, Eno River State Park, has had a bunch of reports of paranormal activity there. In this episode, I want to talk about a specific trip that I went on to North Carolina, where I hiked in both of these parks in 2021, that I've alluded to in a bunch of different episodes, and I'm excited to finally be talking about it now. So listen to this and see if you think that I am someone who would die first in a horror movie. I will say, in my defense, and maybe this is a spoiler, when a nice lady who I met in the woods told me where an abandoned house was, I didn't go. So I think I have plenty of common sense. But I have a couple Estes sessions that I'll play here, and one of those Estes sessions definitely gave me the impression that I wasn't wanted there. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I might have done things slightly differently, upon reflection. So anyway, before I get into the Estes sessions and EVP sessions that I did in these two parks, Umstead State Park in Raleigh and Eno River State Park in Durham, I want to talk about this trip to North Carolina that I went on in October/November 2021. And this will have some similarities to my Scranton sleep paralysis episode in that I am looking at some of the other things that were going on the trip and in life in general at the time. And I always think that context is important because I am of the opinion that a person's mental state and, whether there's some weird stuff going on in their life at the time can definitely affect their experiences of the paranormal. So it only feels right for me to share that sort of thing since it is part of the story to me. So this trip was a bit of a weird one. And when I think back on it, it is literally kind of hazy and strange feeling. Like I'm remembering a memory that's way older than like a year and a half ago, less than a year and a half ago. So my wife and I flew down from New York to Raleigh because my sister was trying on wedding dresses. We were just there for a long weekend, and it happened to be Halloween weekend. Also, I'm not sure that this is relevant, but in case it is, our own wedding anniversary is November 2nd, which was right after we left North Carolina. So there is a lot of personal significance to this time period, both in terms of my sister going through a big rite of passage, trying on wedding dresses, as well as it being right around the time when my wife and I got married a few years before. And I think that everyone also knows, if you're listening to this, you probably know that the time around Halloween is thought to be very liminal, the veil is supposed to be thin, and strange things are said to be afoot around that time of year. And also, on top of that, several really bad things happened while we were in North Carolina. So my wife and I both had deaths in our family. My wife's grandma died, and my great aunt died. And on top of that, and unbeknownst to me at the time, because I am, whatever the opposite of an empath is what I am. I am not perceptive at all. But on the day that my sister tried on wedding dresses, she was in an immense amount of pain. And that night, she ended up having to go to the hospital because she had pancreatitis. Kind of just out of the blue. So the general vibe on this trip was somewhat stressful, and everyone was upset, rightfully so. It was still really nice to see everyone, and my sister did find a wedding dress miraculously, but I wouldn't say the trip went well. So naturally, because of who I am as a person, I also planned while on this trip to go for a couple solo hikes and do some paranormal investigation. Why not? I really like the state parks around there. So I managed to cram that into the weekend as well. So first, on October 28th, 2021, I went for a hike in one of my favorite places, which I talked about the episode before last, William B. Umstead State Park. While I was there, I did an Estes session, and For that session, I decided to sit in the middle of a creek on a large rock near the Sycamore Trail and the Potts Branch Trail, not far from the parking lot near the trailhead, like 10 to 15 minutes away from there, in case anyone near the park is curious. I had a pretty pleasant session that had a few interesting things in it, so I'm going to play it here. And I guess I should talk about what the Estes method is and what the solo Estes method is. I did a whole episode about this last year that goes into a huge amount of depth about the people who developed the Estes method, etc., etc. So listen to that if you want the full story. But the kind of Cliff Notes version of that is spirit boxes have been a popular thing in the paranormal since like the 2000s because they were used on ghost hunting shows, and they're basically just modified radios that scan through stations really quickly. And the idea is that you ask questions and you listen for kind of like voices in the static. And if you get an interesting response, maybe someone's communicating with you. But there are a lot of issues with using spirit boxes in that way, including hearing what you want to hear. That's very easy to do when you know the question and you're listening for the answer. So the Estes method was developed by some paranormal investigators who were working on the show Spirits of the Stanley. And basically the idea is that one person, the receiver, plugs into a spirit box. They're wearing sound blocking headphones. They can't hear anything around them. And they're also wearing a blindfold. So they can't read anyone's lips or even know if anyone's speaking. And then there's another person, the operator, who's asking questions. And that person just asks questions, and the receiver just sits there plugged into the spirit box and says anything that they hear. And if you start to hear something that sounds like a conversation, and if the answers from the receiver start making sense, even though, the receiver has no idea what's being asked, whether anything's being asked, etc., then that might be something interesting, and it's much more reliable and believable than a spirit box, just listening to a spirit box where you can maybe just hear what you want to hear. So I've been playing around since 2021 with a version of the Estes method that I call the solo Estes method. There's plenty of ways to do this, but this is how I do it. So back in 2021, I recorded a whole bunch of questions, like 100-something questions. They included things like, are you a ghost? Questions about the area, questions about a person's life, questions about, just any kind of question I could think of that might be interesting to get an answer for. And I also threw some funny questions in, like, do you like flowers? And the reason why I added those is because I wanted to throw myself off when being the receiver. Because what I do is I plug into the spirit box. I wear sound blocking headphones most of the time when I do it, if I feel that it's safe, but I don't usually wear a blindfold because I don't feel that it's safe to be out alone wearing headphones with something loud playing in them and not being able to see things around you. And I just put the questions that I recorded on shuffle. And, I added silences in there, so it might be saying nothing, it could be asking a question, I don't know, and I just say what I hear. And then I go back and I listen to the recording, and I hear the questions that I recorded previously that have been randomized, and then the answers that I give while plugged into the spirit box. So, I don't want all the questions to be about being a ghost or paranormal stuff, because I don't want to just hear what I want to hear. And if I knew that, I had 100 questions that were just like detailed questions about someone's life or whatever, it feels like that would mess with the potential results. Also, I guess I should give this disclaimer as well. Some of the questions that I recorded are a little bit out there and maybe like a little more aggressive than I would choose to ask in the moment. It really took a lot to think of 100-something questions that were non-specific enough that I could use them in any location, and that also could maybe elicit an interesting response from an entity or a spirit or a ghost or whatever. So some of these questions I just found on random websites just to, throw myself off more. Some of the questions are things I wouldn't normally choose to ask, again, to try not to bias the results. So that's just something to have in mind while you're listening to these too. So anyway, that's what the solo Estes method is. I'm going to play the clip from the session. It is a little bit over 5 minutes long, but it was originally a bit longer. I deleted some of the long pauses of silence during the session because, sometimes I just don't hear anything on the radio or nothing that I can really discern. But I haven't deleted or rearranged any of the questions or answers. The unedited recording has a lot of long stretches of silence, like I said, and a lot of airplane noise because the park is near the airport. So I tried to cut that out as much as possible. And here's the audio from the session.
What time are you from?
Hey, what do you do? Or maybe, well, you do. We got it. Patrick. Hidden. Morning star. Something's out there. It's funny, I'm hearing like some really muffled voices through the spirit box that kind of are there and then gone. That doesn't usually happen to me. The trick.
Are you lost?
What happened or it happened? Dream.
Is there someone who did wrong by you in life?
Mind your back.
What is your worst memory, if you want to share it?
There. I can't see anything behind me. FYI, that's me talking. Yet.
Are you sad?
Pardon. I keep hearing these really faint voices, like just out of what I can hear. I just heard Fordham. Possibly Portal, I guess. Come with me, or just come. My elbow, or my elder. Downward.
If you were once human, what was your occupation? Do you like flowers?
Man, I just switched from FM to AM, and AM's not listenable. There was like this strong banging noise almost. It was totally awful. The rule.
Do you wish I would try to communicate with you another way? If so, how?
He's there. 10. Blue.
Are you originally from somewhere else?
Bring it. Marty. You are? I. Or I have.
What do you wish you could do?
Wound. Option or oculus? Or optical? Or ovilus, maybe? I don't know. 4-time brutal. Not really.
What year are you from?
I'm ready. Move it or leave it. You. Needing that. You. Or you'd.
What is your name?
Hello. That sounded really, really close. It was a man's voice. Y'all don't. Tag. In.
Do you wish you were somewhere else right now?
Hey me. Or it's me.
Were you a prisoner?
Love. This has been everything. Family prayer.
Do you consider yourself normal and
Family prayer thing was
well-adjusted?
weird. I almost heard it more in my brain than in my ears, if that makes sense. But it was very clear. Snakes or names? Got that. Relax. It sounded really close. It was a woman's voice. And true.
What do you want?
Okay, I've stopped the questions. I'll just give it a sec. Do you? That one was very faint. Sensio? Go away. Make the only. Alright, I'm going to end the session. So there are some people coming. But my general impression of the session was that I felt really peaceful. Not much came through. Alright, the people are leaving. It was weird during the session that I kind of kept hearing voices that were really far away. Like, it sounded distinctly like someone was saying something, but it was like just out of earshot. And it wasn't like, I don't know, a lot of the time I hear things and I'm like, I have no idea what that person's saying, but I can hear it clearly or hear it loudly, but not clearly. In this case, it's like I could hear it clearly, but not loudly, but I couldn't quite make out what they were saying, if that made sense. I don't know if I got much. I mentioned I tried putting it into AM because I just wasn't getting much on the FM. And then there was this really loud, like electrical pulsing noise. And I tried turning down the volume. I tried like reversing the, sweep, and then tried adjusting the sweep rate. It was really, really bad, so I had to switch it back pretty quickly. But yeah, we'll see what I got. All right, so that's the session. Again, like I said before I played that, it sounds like these questions and answers are coming very quick after one another, but that really wasn't how it was in real life. Each question has, I think it's between 30 seconds and a minute and a half of silence appended to the audio file. And then I also have just random audio files that are just silence. So when all the files are put on shuffle, there is a sizable amount of time in between different questions in order for, maybe an answer to come through. So that's just worth noting. Like I said, I wasn't going to make people sit through a really long Estes session with a bunch of silence, but I don't want to misrepresent what the experience was like and what the process is like. So anyway, here are my highlights from this. This session was a lot less interesting than the one that I would get in a couple days at Eno River State Park. But some interesting things that stood out to me were that when the recording asked, "Is there someone who did wrong by you in life?" I got the response, "Mind your back," which was just kind of interesting because it made me think about, being stabbed in the back, that sort of thing, which felt appropriate for the question. Then when the recording said, "Are you sad?" it responded either Fordham or Portal, both of which had some meaning to me. For my many complicated feelings about Fordham University, check out my series about that, which I was working on at the time, which could have been why I thought that's what I heard initially. And, if it wasn't referring to Fordham and, me by extension, I guess, it seems like it wanted to take me through a portal and show me something. Maybe whatever they were sad about, especially because the next response was "come with me." And so to me, that part of the session felt like an invitation almost, like an invitation into someone else's sadness. So then I got the responses, "He's there," and "blue," right as a man in a blue shirt walked by on a nearby trail. So I kind of wonder if that was being narrated by whatever I may have been communicating with. There was the question, "What do you wish you could do?" And it got the response, "wound," which, if we accept the premise that maybe I was communicating with a ghost and this person had been wronged, then maybe this person might want to wound someone, though also, who knows? I don't find it super, super compelling, but it was an answer that made sense to me. When I got the question, "What is your name?" I heard a man's voice say "hello," and it sounded really close. It's hard to explain how a voice could sound closer or further when everything's coming out of headphones, but it just had that vibe. And then when the question, "Were you a prisoner?" came up, I got the responses, "Love, this has been everything," and "family prayer." To me, this has the vibe of talking to a wise older person who is maybe giving me advice, and they're saying that love and family can get you through the hard times when you feel trapped and imprisoned. And it was interesting because I felt like family prayer was being said more directly in my mind rather than something that I heard through my ears from the spirit box. So, paranormal investigation I think is incredibly subjective, and so much of it is about how you feel at that time and in that moment. So I wrote down my impressions after the session, and here's what I had to say then in October 2021. I said, "It really seems like there was an intelligence at work in this session. It seemed like there was a person or family destroyed by love affairs, maybe star-crossed ones. The conversation about the trail seemed gentle, but they wanted to warn and protect me, mind your back, etc. I felt like they could see through a portal into time that I couldn't during the 'Are you sad?' answers. And it was funny when it started narrating the man walking by. I think they're trying to comfort me with the normal and well-adjusted part. There was a question that came up that was, "Do you consider yourself normal and well-adjusted?" And one of the responses that I got right after that was, "Relax." So I think that's what I'm referring to in my notes there. But that was what I came away with from that session. And that's what I have to say when it comes to William B. Umstead State Park. Not super exciting, not super dramatic. I'm not sure that the same can be said for Eno River State Park, but also, I'm kind of trying to build this up a little bit so that way, when you listen to this, you'll be like, "Oh yeah, it's not that creepy." You shouldn't have left earlier than you did, because I don't want to seem like a fool who perhaps lingers too long after I've been told clearly to go away. So, hopefully I've hyped it up enough that then I seem totally reasonable when you listen to it. We'll see. So anyway, Eno River State Park. I talked about it last time, and I went into a lot of detail about this place called the Cabelands Cemetery, as well as just the area that the Cabe family had lived and owned a lot of land in that area. And I go into a ton of detail in that episode, so listen to that if you want to know more about the history. But let's look at the visit. So, the first time I visited the Cabelands Cemetery, or tried to, was in November 2020, but I was not able to find it. It's not far from the parking lot, but it's off trail, and it was a bit confusing to try to figure out where the trail was, because there were two different things that looked like they could have been the not trail, one of which was piled with sticks that were perpendicular to the path. So I thought maybe that wasn't it, though spoiler alert, it was. And then the other thing that I thought might have been the not trail that led to the cemetery was just nothing, I guess. It was winter, and I find sometimes that I can get a little confused about trails in the winter because everything's dead, so it's harder to see where a path has been worn through. And as much as I love hiking, I'm not exactly an outdoors person, so not super skilled at finding any kind of trail that's not clearly blazed. So I have two people to thank for being able to find the cemetery in 2021. So the first is Alex Matsuo, who you might know on social media as the Spooky Stuff. She posted a picture of the cemetery on Instagram, and I DM'd her, and I said that I had tried to visit the cemetery, but I wasn't able to find it, so could she please give me directions? Now, I actually did already have directions and a map from enoriver.org, but for whatever reason, it still wasn't that helpful to me, so I literally sent her a picture that I had taken from the parking lot in December 2020, and I labeled the different potential paths leading away from the parking lot, and I was basically like, is it path A or path B? And she very graciously answered my questions. So thank you, Alex. And Alex actually has a great write-up on her website about the park, which I wanted to read a bit from, and this is linked in the show notes if you want to read more. But she wrote, "This location is near where I live, and it's probably one of the most active places I've been to. This little cemetery is easy to miss if you're not paying attention while you're on the hiking trail. While there are only 12 markers, it's believed that there are actually 51 people buried here. The nearby Cabe homestead is also a hotbed of activity. My team and I did an extensive investigation in the area right before COVID-19 hit, and funny enough, we just kept getting responses from a spirit that was obsessed with geese. They just kept saying goose, geese, goose repeatedly. Others who have visited this spot have also reported seeing shadow figures and feeling the presence of multiple people. We also heard phantom voices and strange feelings around the Eno River." So the second person who I have to thank for helping me find the cemetery is a mysterious stranger who I met in the park when my brother-in-law first dropped me off at the parking lot by the Cabelands, because I can't drive. There was only one person around, a woman my age who is walking her dog. She had forgotten her dog's leash, so she was going to hike off trail. And, it's North Carolina, so people are very friendly there. So she and I got to talking, and I told her I was trying to get to the cemetery, so we walked there together. And I was telling her about how I hadn't realized that this was the right path to the cemetery because of all the branches and falling trees that had been put across the path. And she said that I assume the people who run the park, had put those there to try to discourage people from going on that path to the cemetery since it wasn't a main trail. So when we got to the cemetery, I stayed there and she went on, but a little bit later, no more than 20 minutes, I would say, but I think a lot less, she came back to the cemetery. I had just been recording a little bit before starting an EVP session, kind of just set up and my impressions of the area, and I had just stopped recording because I wanted the EVP session to be on a different track. And I was really bummed that I had stopped recording right at that moment because she told me about some weird stuff that she found in the woods, and that would have been cool to have recorded. But since I didn't have that, I did record a quick recap of what she told me right after she left. It's nothing paranormal, but it was definitely creepy, and it set the tone for the rest of the day for me. So I'm going to play that audio file since I think it's better to hear it from me at the time than me a year and a half almost later. So a couple of things to keep in mind. I was whispering in the beginning because she had just left the cemetery area, so I didn't want her to hear me recording. And also, you'll hear leaves crunching as I walked around a little bit. I really should have stayed put because the leaves were very loud, but I didn't think about that at the time, so sorry about that. So here's that file.
So the woman with her dog just came back, and she's leaving now. But I had just turned off the recorder, but she told me that she was walking off the trail because she forgot her dog's leash. And they were walking off to the... so she was walking off to the east. Yeah, east, maybe northeast. And she said it was like the ruins of an encampment. And I was like, oh, like the pump house ruins? She was like, no. This was recent. This was someone who recently was living out here in the woods. And she said it was dilapidated and looked like it hadn't been used in a while, but she said it was there. And she said also she saw what looked like a deer blind that was not dilapidated and that looked like it had stuff in there as if someone was hunting. And I was like, well, why would there be a deer blind in the state park? Like, I was like, did you veer off into private property? And, there's neighborhoods around here and houses around here. And she was kind of like, I don't think so. And she said she thinks that it's someone who's bow hunting because it's bow season here. And she was pretty creeped out. I mean, she's there with like a big dog, so she wasn't super creeped out. But she was kind of like, oh, if you're a photographer, there's some interesting stuff over there. And yeah, she said it was very freaky. And she said, maybe it's just kids playing around in the deer blind. But she said it was a full deer blind. It was, well stocked. And it seemed like it was probably something that a bow hunter was using these days. So I don't know if I want to go off that way. I guess I'll see how I feel. But yeah, she left. She went back to her car. And now it's just me out here in the woods on a random Monday.
So here I was, alone in the woods, wondering who else was out there. I'm generally very comfortable on solo hikes and the solo investigations that I've gone on, but the vibes felt a little bit off in the cemetery. And just being told that there was some kind of weird abandoned shelter that someone had built somewhere in the woods nearby by the only other person I'd seen in the area that day just felt a little bit weird. And it would be another 2 hours or so before I saw another person in the woods, like another hiker. And for the record, there are the ruins of some old houses and cabins in the area that I didn't know about at the time, but I've researched since then. I looked at a map, and as far as I can tell, it's not Sister's House and it's not Cole House. Those are two ruined cabins, basically, ruined houses in the woods. And I have included a link to a blog that has great pictures of both of those. But I don't think that's what this woman saw based on the map and the direction that I said she went off in, etc., and the trail I was near. So I don't know, maybe there's another old ruin. Maybe it wasn't really a pretty recent place that someone had lived in the woods. But like I said earlier, I decided that I did not want to investigate the abandoned place where someone had been living or the deer blind. It was all well and good for this woman because she had a big dog, but I decided I didn't need to check it out that time around, at least. So then I did an EVP session. I'm not a huge fan of EVPs in general. That stands for electronic voice phenomenon. And the idea is that, you can kind of ask questions while your recorder is running, pause for an answer, listen back to it. And people have said that, you can maybe catch responses from whatever entities might be around on the recording. I have a lot of hesitancy around EVPs because it's really easy to hear what you want to hear. Also, my hearing is not so great, so I always listen to things and think, well, that's probably not anything. And I've only ever gotten one really good EVP, which I do talk about in the Hawthorne Hotel episodes way back in 2020, which were some of the first episodes of the podcast that I did. But because of some technical and also just other mysterious reasons, the EVP that was crystal clear while I was listening to it in the hotel room the morning after I recorded it, suddenly became almost completely inaudible when I listened to it at home. So I don't understand what happened there. It feels like it was a disappearing EVP, but I listened to it. My friend listened to it. We both heard it. But then when I got back to New York, no dice. Also, just want to apologize if you can hear the radiator on in the background. It is January in New York City, and the radiator just really kicked up to a higher level, and it is real loud, and we don't have control over these things as renters in New York City. So I'm sorry. I hope it's not too bad. I'll try to take it out in post. Okay, anyway, in Eno River State Park, I decided to do an EVP session to see what I would get. I recorded a quick intro before asking questions, like I said. So right off the bat, the recording has some weird sounds that I couldn't account for, but I don't know that they were paranormal, so I'm not going to play them. But then about 5 minutes in, I hear footsteps, and you can't hear them in the audio, but here's the description that I gave at the time while I was recording.
It's funny, I thought I heard someone walking by, but I didn't hear the crunching of leaves, so I must have been hearing something else.
So in case you had any trouble understanding that, basically I was there doing my little EVP session and I hear footsteps, and then I stop myself and I'm like, no, they can't be footsteps because I would hear leaves crunching. But I just had a really strong feeling like they were footsteps, and they seemed to be coming from behind and to the right of me. And I didn't hear any other sounds like that. So that was a little bit strange. Then, about 7.5 minutes into the session, my right ear popped. That was the ear that had been facing in the direction that I had heard footsteps from. At the time, I'd been crouched down, taking a picture of the tombstone, and it was a bit odd because my ears don't pop very often, usually just when I'm on airplanes or, a really fast elevator. So that was unusual for me, and I believe that popping ears are caused by pressure changes, so that felt worth noting. And at the time, I wasn't aware of this, but apparently other people have reported having their ears pop during EVP sessions and during spirit communication in general. I found out this information while I was researching this. Who knows? Maybe it was something. It also could have just been a coincidence, but a bit of a strange one, if so. And then around 8 minutes and 45 seconds into the session, the wind picked up and a ton of leaves all started falling around me, and it was very dramatic. And it was very sudden that the wind picked up and, these leaves were raining down everywhere. And then it was very sudden when they basically stopped. So it was something that I noted just because it felt odd to me. So during the EVP session, I asked questions about the area and the families who'd lived there. I didn't really get much in terms of EVPs, but there were two notable moments. I asked, "Are you happy that I'm here visiting you?" And then all of a sudden, it got a lot darker, as if a cloud had passed over the sun, or, in front of the sun, which I guess is possible. I don't think I could see very well from there, but it was just a very sudden change. And then I asked, would any of the McCoys or the Cabes, some families who had lived there, like to tell me about their life or what they think about me visiting here? And then after that, on the recording, the background noise of falling leaves and wind got a lot louder, like really loud, for about 20 seconds and then faded back to normal. So that also just felt notable. So then I got set up for the solo Estes session. While I was walking over to the place where I wanted to do it, a leaf hit me right in the face, which struck me as a little funny. And I'm listing all these environmental things just because I noticed them at the time and they felt worth mentioning. I am a little bit hesitant to read into these different things that were occurring, but it is a little bit weird because I feel like I got a weird vibe during the Estes session as well. And it was weird, that my ear popped, which was a very environmental detail. So, I'm mentioning anything that stands out here. And while I was setting up for the Estes session, I had the recorder on and I was just talking. And on the recording, I talked about how a couple days before at Umstead State Park, I hadn't really felt the need to have the recorder on very much. Like I didn't just have it running while I was just kind of hanging out alone. But in Eno River State Park, I got a really lonely and almost desolate feeling the whole time I was there. So I kept the recorder running, probably just so I had an excuse to talk this early into the hike, because this was the very beginning, the first thing I did before doing the actual hike, I didn't feel terrible, but by the end of the hike, I definitely did. And in the cemetery, it just felt a little bit weird. In my notes, I said that I had a sense of not being entirely alone, but also being lonely, which I feel like is the worst of both worlds, right? Like, you feel like something's there or someone's there, but you're also feeling very desolate. And it's funny, I was just, talking about that and remembering how I felt in that moment. And, I heard a sudden, like, the door rattled a little bit. And this is not a paranormal thing, it just slightly rattled. And it made me jump, because even just thinking about how I felt in the cemetery and kind of going back there in my mind made me so tense and jumpy that, there's noises in this apartment all the time. It's New York City, right? And it's an old building. But clearly, it felt weird out there, right? The vibes were off. So I mentioned this a little bit with the Estes session earlier, but I did use a modified version of the solo Estes session in this cemetery. I decided not to use the noise blocking Vic Firth headphones because if I was going to use them, I would need to take off my glasses, which I was not comfortable doing. And of course, I wanted to hear background noise for safety reasons. So instead, I just used my regular earbuds. Not ideal, but safety first, etc. So same deal as before. I'm going to play a clip from the session, and I've deleted the silence, but no other questions and answers. And just to give you a sense of how much silence I cut out, so this was originally a 20-minute session, and the edited clip is 6.5 minutes long. And as I alluded to earlier, while you're listening to this, there may be some moments when you feel like I should have stopped. But remember, in my defense, I had no idea which questions were being played, since they were pulled from a randomized, shuffled list of more than 100 questions that I had recorded months before.
Do you ever feel trapped or confused or lost? I think I heard a muffled "someone please" or "help me please." Peyton? Or Peakness? I'm hearing muffled voices. They sound really far away though. But they sound like words. Muffled voices again. I feel the wind, but I feel it like just on the right side of my neck from the west. It's weird. Just for a second, like someone was breathing on me. It was probably just the wind.
What do you think of the world?
Help people there. Outside. Midnight? That was a muffled man's voice. Sounded far away. What do you want? I heard something that sounded like someone shouting, or like maybe a wolf.
Have you ever considered the possibility that you are a ghost?
I heard something that sounded like an alarm, really loud, going off for just a second. It's weird because I haven't heard that previously. Heard someone shout.
Why are you talking to me?
Were you ever? I know. That was a man's voice far away. I heard "I know" again, even further away in a man's voice.
What is your name?
I heard two things, but I couldn't understand what they were.
If you have any sort of supernatural or ghostly powers, have you ever attacked anyone using them?
I heard a voice, but it was far away. Here. Young man.
Are you mad?
Me. Open. A few. Halloween, or following you. I think it was following you, not Halloween. Someone. I heard something that sounded almost like Hogwarts, though I don't think that's what it was said, but it was like shouted. It sounded very urgent in a man's voice. It might have said "forward," or "4 words."
If you are a ghost, what do you enjoy most about being a ghost?
Forward, very slowly in a low voice. Then I heard, I think, tall or talk. Forwards. I'm looking all around me. I don't see anything.
What do you like the least about being a ghost, if you
Forward.
are one? What do you miss most about being alive, if you
Trench
ever
coat.
were alive?
Function. That was in a very low man's voice. And who? The spirit box
Do
just
you
got a
know
lot quieter.
any other
Really
ghosts?
quiet now. I'll turn it up a bit. Heard a muffled man's voice, but I don't... muffled man's voice, but I don't know what was said.
Was there a moment where you were consciously aware of becoming a ghost?
Aye. That will do. Get out. That was a woman's voice.
Are you happy?
Unpleasant? I feel like I heard someone's voice talking across the different channels, but it was very soft and a man's voice and it felt far away, so I couldn't understand the words after that first one. No. That was a woman's voice. No. A woman's voice. It's funny, I just got a really solid image of like a mother with some children, and she's kind of like ushering them forward and saying, come on, and they were going for a picnic. And I had this feeling that if I turned my head to the right, which I guess would be like southwest, that I would see them coming down the trail. And of course there's no one there, it's just me. I think we have it. New York.
Do you like people?
You know? Or you know where. I think it was you know where. No.
Are you
Or
searching
move,
for
maybe.
someone or something?
Yeah, I think it was move. Just said really quickly. A fight? The last couple things I've heard have sounded like very urgent, like in a man's voice. I have.
Is there anything that you want to tell me?
Turning off the questions now. I know. You let me in. Oh. That's 20 minutes. I'm going to unplug from the spirit box now. Huh. Sounds so quiet now that I'm not plugged in anymore. I feel like I hear running water, which I didn't hear before, but it's probably just the leaves and the trees. So I'd like to thank anyone who's been speaking to me today. I really appreciate you talking to me. I hope that you enjoy talking to me. I hope that you see that I'm approaching you in a spirit of respect. And I'm sorry that I didn't leave immediately when you said things like move and go, like that stuff. I will leave now, but I hope you didn't find that disrespectful. And thank you so much for speaking with me. So, just for reference, I was standing during the whole session, I was standing right next to the grave of W.T. Shields, who was born April 1st, 1840, and died March 18th, 1919. And I was standing just beside their grave. You can see an indentation in the ground, and there's a footstone that says WTS and a headstone that says W.T. Shields. And this is the one with the three pretty flowers. The sun just went behind a cloud. Just gonna put away my spirit box. Yeah, it's really dark now.
So for this session, I decided to leave in my sort of ending spiel because usually, I start each session kind of addressing whatever I might be communicating with or whoever I might be communicating with, and I do end it with a thank you. I decided to keep the end here because I found it kind of funny because while I said in my defense before playing this clip that I didn't know what questions were being asked, so I didn't really know if the things I was hearing were telling me to leave. I clearly got a really bad vibe and felt like I needed to address it when I was signing off after my session or like ending the session. So some of the highlights for me during this session are the moment when it felt like someone was maybe breathing on me. That was on my right side again. Though in the recording, I try to play it off as the wind because I was getting pretty freaked out. In my notes after the session, I describe it as a localized puff rather than a breeze. Like it didn't feel like the entire side of my neck and that whole side of my body was being hit by, a breeze. It felt like just a little bit of my neck had, a localized puff of air, like someone was exhaling on it, which is a little creepy. There was a bit that I think I cut out, but when the recording asks, have you ever considered the possibility that you are a ghost? The wind picks up a lot and then I hear an alarm. and then I hear someone shouting through the spirit box. So that felt potentially relevant. Then I ask the very inflammatory question that I would not necessarily suggest that you ask. I ask, if you have any sort of supernatural or ghostly powers, have you ever attacked anyone using them? And I get the answer, here, and young man, which kind of felt to me as if a young man had been attacked there, but who knows? When the recording asks, are you mad? I get the answers me, open, a few, and then the wind picks up again, and then I get following you, which I had initially misheard as Halloween, and then I get someone. So I looked around a bit after that. I didn't see anyone else around, but that was definitely a little bit creepy because I had already had placed in my mind that idea that like maybe someone was living out in the woods or had been camping out in the woods, you know? And I've noticed before in other Estes sessions, in particular solo ones, because I've done more solo ones than regular ones, I've noticed that sometimes when I mishear a word, I hear it again, as if whatever I'm communicating with is correcting me or confirming the word. That happened with forward in this session, which was said 4 times almost consecutively. At the point that it said, that will do, and get out, I, an empath, was beginning to suggest that I was not wanted there. Again, like I said, I'm whatever the opposite of an empath is. Then when the recording asked, are you happy? I got the response, unpleasant. And then I heard a man's voice talking across different channels, which shouldn't really happen, right? Because it's flipping really quickly across different channels, like, sweeping through different channels quickly. So you shouldn't hear a voice across multiple channels. So anyway, the questions, are you happy? I get the response, unpleasant, and then I hear now twice. So then after that, like I mentioned in the recording, I got a really strong mental image of a white woman with 2 or 3 children wearing clothes from, I would say, the 1930s or earlier. And she was waving them forward, telling them to come on or hurry up. And they seemed leisurely, like they were going on a picnic. And of course, no one was there. And I felt them to my right again. And I think all of the things that happened to my right side occurred while I was facing west. So potentially they all came from the same direction. Then when it got to New York and you know where, I felt like those bits were addressed to me since I was visiting from New York. There was the question, do you like people? And then I got the answer, no, or maybe move, which was, that's somewhat blunt. It's a bit hard to tell since I was clarifying the no/move thing around the time that this question was asked, but the recording asks, are you searching for someone or something? And I hear in the spirit box, a fight. So that's great. The final question was, is there anything that you want to tell me? And then I turn off the recording with questions, which I always do. I always like to turn the questions off and then leave the spirit box on for another few minutes to get any final answers. So the question was, is there anything you want to tell me? And then I get the answer, I know you let me in, which was slightly creepy. So in my notes after the session, which I wrote down later that evening, I had this to say. During the session, I was creeped out and kept my gaze mostly fixed on the east, where the woman said the encampment was. Throughout, I swiveled some, trying to keep my eyes out on the environment around me in general. The responses seemed somewhat sinister, the shouts, the insistent forward, I assume telling me to keep going, and the man's voice distant and fading in and out of audibility, the breath on my neck, the mental image of the woman, and before the session, my ear popping, all occurred from the same direction. Was that just because I wasn't facing that way? Or was the encampment a red herring to get me to look away from that direction? All in all, it wasn't the most enlightening session, but I definitely feel that something paranormal was afoot and active. I asked my wife, who wasn't there, but who's very sensitive, what she thought of the session, and here's what she said. She felt like there was a lot of sadness there and something wanted to move on, which is why there was the repeating forward, kind of as a refrain, and she felt that something had happened to the children who they couldn't protect. They being whatever the woman, I sensed, or whatever spirit might be there. Now, normally I put a lot of stock in my wife's impressions of things, but she wasn't there physically, and I'm not totally sure that I agree with my wife here. But I also don't know that I agree with myself Here, in this interpretation of my session, I feel like I was kind of trying to downplay things in my notes, because when I listened back to the session, I was really surprised at some of the stuff that came up. I read my notes first, and I was like, okay, not that big a deal. And then when I was listening to it, I was like, ooh, this is a little creepy. I wouldn't say that the session was enlightening in terms of learning about the history of the area, but it definitely felt like something paranormal was going on and communicating with me, which was very interesting. After the session, I did another recording just talking about my thoughts. I don't always do that, but because I was feeling so shaken, I just wanted to keep talking and feel less alone. So at the time, here's what I observed. It was still weirdly dark as I left the cemetery. Throughout the whole session, I kept having the feeling that I would look around and see someone looking out through the woods at me, probably because of what the woman said. I made the decision not to investigate the abandoned shelter, and as I was leaving the cemetery from the opposite side that I entered it, I saw that someone had tried to block the path on that end as well by cutting narrow trees just above the roots so that the trunk was still attached to the root area, but the whole tree lay over the path. So again, it looks like they are trying to obscure the trail. Then after that, I got back to the real trail, but I got a little turned around, even though I had been on that trail before. I think I just was a little bit shaken. And then I continued on Laurel Bluffs Trail toward the pump station trail and just continued my hike. Oh, and I guess this is worth giving just as a disclaimer. So in my notes, I clearly say that all of the, like the feeling of the breath and the ear popping and all of that all came from the same direction. But in different places in my notes, I say that's like west or east, like I kind of switch off. But at any rate, I do think they were all coming from the same direction, but I can't feel 100% sure that it was all from the west or all from the east. In case anyone needs that information, I think I was just a little bit frazzled and either misspoke or wrote down the wrong thing a couple times. So then after that, I ended up doing another EVP session later on by the ruins of the chimney that was just off the trail, or one of the chimneys. I think there's probably more than one, but I didn't really get anything because there was too much background noise with the wind and the crunching leaves. I hiked about 7 more miles after my Estes session. I definitely felt worse and worse throughout the day emotionally, like I mentioned. I felt a little unsettled during the session, but as time went on, I felt lonelier and lonelier. And I mentioned that I saw almost no other people because it was, a random Monday, not part of a holiday weekend or anything. And by the time I was done with the hike, I was about as unsettled as I often am when I go to a certain part of the Hellgate here in Astoria, Queens. If you want to know more about that, check out my episode about randonauting and the despair meme, where I talk about all of that. But I definitely had a strong, bad feeling by the end of the day. And it's also worth noting that this was the day after Halloween. Not sure if it had any effect on my feelings or experiences, but seems like it very well could have. So anyway, that's what I've got for these state parks in North Carolina. I really enjoy hiking both places. I will definitely be back next time I'm back in town, I'm sure. I hope that listening to my Estes session, you didn't feel like I'm too much of a fool, and too much like the person who would die first in a horror movie. But, I guess I wouldn't blame you if you did think that. And last time I said that I would share other accounts of Eno River State Park's hauntings that I found online, but this episode has gone on for a while, and I still haven't found that many accounts, so I think I'm probably just going to drop those into my next newsletter, talk a little bit more about that later. So if you want to sign up for that, check out BuriedSecretsPodcast.com/newsletter to sign up. You can also check out BuriedSecretsPodcast.com for the show notes with all of my sources and links to everything that I've referenced. You can follow me on Instagram at Buried Secrets Podcast. If you liked this episode, please rate and review it on whatever podcatcher you're listening to, but especially Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you want to write to me, my email address is BuriedSecretsPodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.